I entered my wife's birthday party with flowers only to see my wife's rich ex-lover on one knee proposing to her. "Will you leave your poor husband and marry me?" Then my wife said yes. So I walked away quietly and dropped my gift on the table. Minutes later, after she opened my gift, I had 227 missed calls and someone knocked at my door. You know that moment when your whole world shifts and you're standing there like an idiot holding flowers while your life gets auctioned off to the highest bidder? Yeah. Welcome to my Tuesday night. I stepped into the private lounge of the Meridian Tower because of course it had to be at Tristan's building, clutching white lilies like they were going to somehow fix whatever train wreck was about to unfold. The small black box in my other hand felt heavier than it should have considering what was inside. But we'll get to that little surprise later. This was supposed to be Selena's birthday party, my wife's 32nd to be exact. The woman I'd been married to for 4 years, who I'd watched build her lifestyle brand a claw award from our kitchen table into something that could afford parties like this. The room screamed money in that understated way rich people love. Crystal glasses that probably cost more than most people's rent. A string quartet that wasn't playing background music so much as providing a soundtrack to everyone's carefully curated conversations, and champagne that bubbled like liquid gold under lights that cost more than my first car. But the real showstopper, that wall of glass overlooking the Hudson River, where Manhattan twinkled like it was auditioning for a movie about successful people doing successful things. The kind of view that makes you feel important just for being in the same room with it. I should have known something was up when I walked in and felt the energy shift. You know that feeling when you enter a room and suddenly everyone's trying really hard to look like they're not looking at you? Like they all got the memo about some big drama that's about to go down and you're the only one still checking your email. The room had maybe 50 people. Selena's circle, some investors, a few influencers who treated socializing like a contact sport, and enough venture capital brothers to start their own cryptocurrency. These weren't the kind of people who did anything small. When they threw parties, they threw statements. When they made moves, they made sure everyone was watching. I was scanning the crowd for my wife when the room suddenly went quiet. Not regular quiet, that theatrical kind of quiet that happens right before someone announces they're pregnant or gets engaged, or in this case decides to blow up someone else's marriage on live social media. That's when I saw him. Tristan Hale, looking like he'd stepped out of a Forbes 30 Under 30 wet dream, standing under the chandelier with a microphone in his hand and that smile that had probably closed 1,000 deals and broken twice as many hearts. The man was venture capital royalty, the kind of guy who could fund your startup over brunch and buy your building before dessert. He was also my wife's ex-boyfriend, the one she totally got over but somehow still texted about business opportunities. The one whose name came up just a little too often in conversations about a Claw Award's future growth plans. The one who apparently had been planning this little performance for God knows how long. Tristan looked around the room like he owned it, which, let's be honest, he probably did. And then his eyes found Selena. My wife stood near the bar looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, but also like she'd been expecting this moment her entire life. The contradiction should have been my first clue, but hindsight's always 20/20 when you're watching your marriage get demolished in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tristan said into the mic, his voice carrying that smooth confidence that comes from never having to worry about student loans or whether your car will start in the morning. "I hope you're all enjoying Selena's celebration tonight." The crowd murmured its agreement. Phones already starting to rise like some kind of digital seance, because nothing says authentic moment like 40 people recording it for their Instagram stories. "I've known Selena for 8 years, Tristan continued, moving through the crowd like he was working a campaign rally. "I've watched her build something incredible with a Claw Award. I've seen her turn ideas into reality, dreams into revenue, vision into empire. I felt my grip tighten on the lilies. Where exactly was this going? But more than that," he said, stopping right in front of Selena. "I've watched her settle for less than she deserves." And there it was. The knife sliding in smooth and precise. The room held its breath as Tristan dropped to one knee. Actually dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring box that probably cost more than most people's houses. The chandelier light hit the diamond and threw rainbows across the ceiling like some kind of cosmic joke. "Selene Ward," he said, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent room. "Will you leave your poor husband and marry me?" Poor husband. The words hit like a slap, but not because they weren't true. Hell, compared to Tristan's portfolio, I was basically broke. But the way he said it, like I was some kind of obstacle to be removed, some outdated software that needed upgrading. That's what made my blood freeze and boil at the same time. I watched my wife's face, waiting for her to laugh, to tell him he was crazy. To remember that her actual husband was standing 20 feet away holding her birthday flowers like some kind of discount delivery service. But when her eyes met mine, I didn't see shame or surprise or even guilt. I saw relief. Pure, undiluted relief, like she'd been holding her breath for years and could finally exhale. "Yes," she said, her voice clear enough to carry across the room without the microphone. "Yes, I'll marry you." The crowd erupted. Actual cheering like they were at a sports game instead of watching someone's marriage get cremated in public. Phones shot up everywhere, capturing every angle of Tristan sliding that massive rock onto Celane's finger while she smiled like she just won the lottery, which, let's be honest, she probably had. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds watching my wife hug her new fiancé while strangers applauded the destruction of my life. My throat felt tight, like someone had wrapped a cable around my neck and was slowly turning the crank. But then something interesting happened. The tightness cooled just like that, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the emotional temperature in the room. The noise faded to background static and suddenly I could think clearly for the first time in months, maybe years. I walked through the celebrating crowd like I was invisible, which, let's face it, I probably was to most of these people anyway. Made my way to the gift table, a ridiculous spread of expensive boxes and bags that looked like a luxury department store had exploded, and set the white lilies down carefully. Then I placed the small black box right on top where everyone could see it. The box that contained 2 very specific items that were going to make this celebration a lot more interesting than anyone expected. But that's a story for later. I turned around and walked toward the exit. Not the main entrance where everyone was still taking selfies with the happy couple, but the service entrance that led to the loading dock. The one that wouldn't require me to navigate through a crowd of people pretending they hadn't just witnessed a public execution. I didn't break anything, didn't throw punches or make speeches or perform for the cameras that were still rolling. I just left quiet as smoke. While behind me, the party continued like nothing had changed. The service door opened onto the loading dock, and the night air hit my face like clean water. After swimming in chlorine all day, the Hudson River stretched out below, dark and infinite, while the city hummed its electric lullaby around me. For the first time in hours, maybe months, I could breathe. The thing about betrayal is that it's almost never a surprise when it finally happens. It's just the end of a long, slow process that you've been watching unfold in real time, making excuses for every red flag until you're standing in a field of them, wondering when everything turned red. I pulled out my phone and looked at the time, 9:47 p.m. perfect. Still plenty of time to make some calls. Because here's what Tristan and Selena and their audience of venture capital vultures didn't know. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. And sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one who's been playing the longest game of all. Time to remind them that invoices are always louder than applause. You want to know the beautiful thing about being underestimated? People stop paying attention to what you're actually doing. They see what they expect to see. In my case, the poor husband with the soft eyes and the quiet demeanor, and they assume that's all there is to the story. Big mistake. I stood in our loft kitchen at 10:15 p.m. still wearing my party clothes, but feeling like I'd shed an entire layer of skin back at that celebration. The kitchen where I'd spent countless Saturday mornings renovating with my own hands and money, ripping out the builder-grade cabinets and installing custom walnut ones that cost more than most people's cars, where I'd rewired the electrical myself because I was too cheap to hire an electrician and too stubborn to live with outlets that didn't work. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was standing in a space I'd literally built while everyone assumed I was just along for the ride in my own life. But here's the thing about being the quiet guy in the room. You get really good at listening and watching, and most importantly remembering. While Selena was building her brand and Tristan was building his empire, I'd been building something, too. Something they never bothered to notice because it didn't come with press releases or TED Talks or photo oots for Forbes. I'd been building a foundation, and foundations by design are supposed to be invisible. Let me break down what Team Tristan and Aline forgot to factor into their little hostile takeover. First, there's my mother's trust. Mom died when I was 25, and she left me something that most people don't get. Actual, honest to God, money. Not buy a yacht, money, but never worry about renegade money. The kind of financial cushion that lets you make moves without desperation clouding your judgment. I never talked about it because frankly it wasn't anyone's business, but it meant that when opportunities came up, I could act fast and think long term, like those shares in Hale Meridian Capital that I'd been quietly accumulating for the past 3 years. Yeah, you heard that right. While Tristan was busy being the face of venture capital success, I was becoming one of his minority shareholders. Not through some dramatic corporate raid or hostile takeover. Just boring methodical purchases through index baskets that no one pays attention to. A few shares here, a small block there, always staying below the reporting thresholds that would trigger disclosure requirements. By my last count, I owned 12.4% of his firm. Not enough to control anything, but definitely enough to make things interesting when combined with other minority shareholders who were getting tired of Tristan's publicity-seeking antics. Then there's a Claw Ward, Celane's precious lifestyle brand, The company that everyone assumed was her baby built with her vision and her hustle and her Instagram perfect aesthetic. What they didn't know, what she apparently forgot in all the excitement of becoming Mrs. Future Hale, was that I personally guaranteed every single operating line of credit that kept her business running. Every single one. The printing contracts for her packaging guaranteed by Julian Reyes. The shipping agreements with her logistics partners. Julian Reyes personal guarantor. The credit lines with her suppliers. You guessed it. When banks looked at a Cloward's financials and saw a lifestyle brand with inconsistent cash flow, they saw risk. When they saw my signature on the guarantee forms, they saw stability. I'd spent 4 years building relationships with vendors across printing, shipping, and retail tech. Not because I wanted to be the puppet master behind Celane's success, but because someone had to handle the boring stuff while she focused on being the face of the brand. Someone had to make sure the invoices got paid and the shipments arrived on time and the credit facilities stayed current. Guess who that someone was? The funny thing is, I actually enjoyed it. There's something satisfying about building systems that work, creating processes that run smoothly, establishing relationships based on trust and reliability rather than flash and personality. While Selena was at industry conferences talking about disrupting the lifestyle space, I was in warehouse offices in Queens making sure her products actually got to customers who ordered them. But the real kicker, the detail that was going to turn tonight from embarrassing to catastrophic for the happy couple, was the postnuptial agreement we'd signed 2 years ago. You see, after a Claw Award started taking off and Selena began getting attention from investors, her lawyer suggested we clarify our financial arrangements, protect the business interests, separate personal assets from corporate ones, that sort of thing. Very reasonable, very modern, very much in keeping with how successful couples handle money in the 21st century. What that postnup actually said in very clear black and white language was that any business ventures launched during our marriage using jointly held assets or credit facilities would be subject to specific division protocols in the event of separation or divorce. And since I guaranteed most of a Claw Award's operating expenses, and since those guarantees were secured against assets I brought into the marriage, well, let's just say the math was about to get very interesting for everyone involved. The best part, tonight's party itself was funded through my merchant services account. The venue, the catering, the string quartet, the crystal glasses, the champagne, all of it running through payment rails that I'd established and that I controlled. When the venue manager ran Celane's corporate card for the final bill, the transaction was going to hit my underwriting system, the system that I could shut down with a phone call. I looked around our kitchen, my kitchen, and started making a mental inventory of all the things that existed because I'd made them exist. The custom cabinets I designed and installed, the commercial-grade appliances I'd researched and purchased, the smart home system I programmed to control everything from lighting to temperature to security. The apartment itself was in my name, purchased with money from my mother's trust before Selena and I were even engaged. The insurance policies, the utility accounts, the maintenance contracts, all tied to my social security number and my credit score and my bank accounts. Everyone thought I was just the calm husband with the soft eyes standing quietly in the background while more interesting people did more interesting things. They saw what they wanted to see, a supporting character in someone else's story. What they missed was that I'd been writing the story all along. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. 3 calls to make. 3 people who understood that business was business regardless of whatever personal drama was playing out on social media right now. Amara Okafor, my attorney. Luis Mendoza, my banker. Nua Khalid, my operations lead. The people who knew exactly what I'd built and how it all worked and what would happen when I decided to stop being quite so supportive. The funny thing about foundations is that they're invisible until you remove them. Then suddenly, everyone notices what was holding everything up. Time to give Tristan and Selena a crash course in structural engineering. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen island I'd installed myself, and started making calls. Outside, the city glittered like a circuit board. All those lights powered by invisible infrastructure that most people never thought about. Just like the infrastructure I'd built around my own life. The infrastructure I was about to shut down. You know what's better than having friends? Having friends who don't ask stupid questions when you call them at 10:30 p.m. and say, "I need to burn some bridges tonight and I need your help." The first call went to Amara Okafor. Amara is the kind of lawyer who makes other lawyers nervous at dinner parties. She doesn't do small talk, doesn't bill for phone calls that last under 5 minutes, and has never, in the 8 years I've known her, asked me to explain why I need something done. She just asks when and how much. Julian, she answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting for my call. I saw the Instagram stories. Congratulations on your freedom. See what I mean? No wasted time on how are you feeling or are you okay? Or any of that emotional support nonsense that just slows things down when you're trying to execute a plan. Straight to business, which is why Amara bills $400 an hour and worth every penny. I need the envelope opened, I said. Which envelope? Separation and asset control. The one we drafted 6 months ago. There was a pause, but not the kind of pause that means someone's thinking about whether they should do something. The kind of pause that means someone's already opening their laptop and pulling up the right files. The nuclear option, she said. You sure about this timing? The optics aren't great. Dumping your wife on her birthday after she gets engaged to someone else. The optics were never going to be great, I said. And the timing is perfect. She just gave me cause. Material misrepresentation of marital commitment, Amara said, and I could hear her typing. Public humiliation constituting emotional abuse, breach of fiduciary duty regarding jointly held business interests. Yeah, I can work with this. This is why I love working with professionals. They don't need 30 minutes of emotional backstory to understand the assignment. How fast can you file emergency motion for asset preservation? I can have it in the system by midnight. Temporary restraining orders on the joint accounts by morning. Full separation paperwork by end of week. Do it. Consider it done. Anything else? Yeah. Make sure the filing includes the postnup provisions about business guarantees. All of them. Another pause. This one with some actual weight behind it. Julian, you realize that's going to freeze her company operations, right? Like completely. I realize that. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with a lot of things tonight that I wasn't okay with this morning. Fair enough. I'll send you the filing confirmation once it's submitted. Click done. One down. The second call went to Luis Mendoza. Luis runs the private banking division at Meridian Financial. Yeah, the same building where tonight's little drama went down, which is either ironic or cosmic justice, depending on how you look at it. He's the guy who handles accounts for people who have enough money to need someone like Louise, but not so much money that they're worth Goldman Sachs' time. Perfect sweet spot for someone like me. Julian, my friend, Louise answered in that voice that somehow managed to sound both relaxed and completely alert. Working late tonight. I need some account adjustments. I said tonight. What kind of adjustments are we talking about? The kind that protect my interests while other people figure out what their interests actually are. Louise laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. More like the laugh of someone who'd been waiting for this call for months. You want to talk about this on the phone, or should I assume you're already thinking 3 moves ahead? I'm thinking 5 moves ahead. Can you handle a time-boxed fund sweep at 2,359? I can handle whatever you need handled. What are we sweeping? Everything that runs through my merchant rails. Everything guaranteed against my assets. Everything authorized under my signature, including her business accounts, especially her business accounts. There was some keyboard clicking on Louis' end. The sound of someone pulling up multiple screens and cross-referencing account numbers and authorization codes. Okay, I'm looking at the structure here. Louise said, this is going to be comprehensive. You sure you want to do this all at once? Louise, in about 12 hours, Selena's going to wake up and realize she just blew up her marriage on live television. Then she's going to call her lawyer, who's going to tell her to freeze every account she can get her hands on. I'd rather not give her that opportunity. Makes sense. What about timing on the merchant holds? Immediate. And I want authorization rekeyed on anything that currently runs automatic payments. So if someone tries to run her company card, it gets declined. Even if it's for something that was pre-authorized, especially if it's for something that was pre-authorized. More typing. Louise was the kind of banker who never made you explain the same thing twice, which is probably why his clients trusted him with 8-figure or account balances. All right, I've got the framework set up. Sweep executes at 2,359. Holds go active immediately after. Rekeying happens overnight. You'll get confirmation emails for everything. Thanks, Louise. Julian, for what it's worth, I saw the videos. She handled that badly. Yeah, well, live and learn. Right. Anything else you need tonight? Just make sure everything posts before she thinks to call her own banker. Consider it handled. Click. 2 down. The third call went to Norcolid. Nor is my operations lead, which is a fancy way of saying she's the person who actually makes things happen while everyone else is busy having meetings about making things happen. She manages vendor relationships for 3 different companies I'm involved with, knows more about supply chain logistics than most people know about their own jobs, and has never, in the 4 years we've worked together, failed to deliver on a deadline. Also, she's got the kind of mind that can look at a complex system and immediately see where all the pressure points are. Julian, she said when she picked up, This is either about the Instagram thing or you're calling to tell me we're expanding operations. Given the time, I'm guessing it's the Instagram thing. It's the Instagram thing. I need a network pause. Which network? A Claw Ward. Everything. 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 Or just the new stuff. Everything. Shipments, payments, auto renewals, pinning orders. I want it all stopped, reversed, and clawed back to our facilities pending new authorization. Nor was quiet for about 10 seconds, which in Norm is like a 5-minute conversation. Julian, that's going to strand about $40,000 worth of product in transit, plus whatever sitting in third-party fulfillment centers. I know. And it's going to burn some relationships with vendors who thought they were dealing with a stable operation. I know that, too. And Selena's going to wake up tomorrow to discover that her entire business has basically been turned off. That's the idea. Another pause. Are you sure about this? Because once I send these messages, there's no taking them back quietly. This is going to make noise. Nor I've been guaranteeing her business operations for 4 years. Today, she decided she didn't need me anymore. I'm just helping her get what she wanted. Fair enough. How do you want me to handle the vendor communications? Clean and professional operational pause pinning authorization review from primary guarantor. No drama, no explanations, just business. And if they ask questions, tell them to call me. I'll be available. Okay. This is going to take me about an hour to execute properly. You want status updates? Just confirmation when it's done. You got it, Juliet? Yeah, for what it's worth, I never understood why you let her treat your support like it was invisible. Well, now it's about to become very visible, I guess. So, I'll get this started. Click. 3 for 3. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and looked at the time. 11:08 p.m. Less than an hour until Louis' sweep executed. Less than an hour until Amara's filings hit the system. Less than an hour until Noor's network messages started propagating through vendor systems from Brooklyn to Bangladesh. I made myself a cup of tea. The good stuff, the Earl Grey that Selena always said was too expensive for everyday use, and sat down to wait. The beautiful thing about having the right people in your corner is that you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to justify your decisions or defend your choices or convince anyone that you're doing the right thing. You just have to point them at the target and let them work. And in about 52 minutes, Celine and Tristan were about to discover that the quiet guy in the background had been holding all the important pieces together. Time to see what happens when those pieces stop being held. You want to know the difference between revenge and justice? Revenge is emotional. Justice is paperwork. That little black box I left on the gift table wasn't some dramatic gesture or cryptic message designed to make people wonder what the mysterious husband was thinking. It was a business communication, professional, precise, and absolutely devastating in its simplicity. See, while everyone was busy taking selfies with the newly engaged couple and posting stories about true love conquering all or whatever hashtag bullshit they were using, nobody bothered to check the gifts. Why would they? It's a birthday party, not Christmas morning. Presents are for later after the champagne runs out and people start getting bored with congratulating themselves for witnessing history. But around midnight, when the party finally started winding down, and Selena realized she should probably at least acknowledge the pile of expensive boxes that people had brought to celebrate her existence, someone was going to open that box. And that's when the real party would begin. Inside that innocent-looking black jewelry box, the kind you get from boutique stores that charge $300 for earrings, were 2 items that were going to turn Selena's engagement celebration into a crash course in contract law. First item, a silver key, not just any key. This was the key to safe deposit box number 247 at Meridian Trust, the bank in the basement of the same building where we just watched my marriage get publicly executed. Box number 247 contained the original documents for our postnuptial agreement, signed and notarized copies of every vendor guarantee I'd personally backed for a claward, and the venue contract addendum for tonight's party. You know, the addendum that clearly stated in Section 12C that if the primary event sponsor withdrew support due to material misrepresentation of the nature or purpose of the event, all associated costs would immediately transfer to the personal accounts of the named beneficiary. The beneficiary being one Celine Ward, soon to be Selena Hale, who was about to discover that her fairy tale engagement party came with a 6-figure or price tag that her business credit cards couldn't cover. But the key was just the appetizer. The real main course was item number 2, a simple white card, business size, with 4 lines of text in that clean, professional font that makes everything sound official and unavoidable. Notice of sponsor withdrawal effective immediately. *** chargeback authorization number 7 refs *** rescission of power of attorney for a claw ward operations ***. Read the attached barcode. Asterisk asterisk. Yeah, that's right. A QR code. Because nothing says, your life is about to get complicated quite like having to pull out your phone to scan a barcode that's going to show you exactly how complicated it's about to get. When Selena scanned that code, and she would scan it because curiosity killed the cat, and Selena had always been very, very curious about anything that might affect her business. It would open a link to a dashboard I'd had Nor build 3 months ago. Not because I was planning this exact scenario, but because I'd learned a long time ago that information is power and real-time information is nuclear power. The dashboard was beautiful in its simplicity. Clean white background, a Clawwords logo at the top, and a series of status tiles that normally showed green check marks next to things like venue deposits confirmed and vendor payments current and credit facilities active. Tonight though, Selena was going to watch those green check marks turn red in real time. Venue funds withdrawn ** 11:47 p.m. Floral arrangements cancelled ** 11:52 p.m. Photography license revoked ** 11:58 p.m. Jewelry gifts flagged as unauthorized corporate purchases ** 12:03 a.m. But the real kicker, the tile that was going to make Tristan's champagne taste like vinegar, was the one at the bottom of the screen. Hail Meridian Capital Minority Block activated 12.4%**. See, Tristan thought he was hot because he controlled the board at his venture capital firm. What he didn't know was that I'd been quietly building relationships with other minority shareholders over the past 18 months. Not the flashy investors who wanted their names on Forbes lists, but the boring institutional guys who cared more about returns than recognition. Coffee meetings in Midtown, lunch at places that don't have Instagram accounts, conversations about governance and oversight, and the importance of keeping high-profile partners from making decisions that could create reputational risk for the firm. Turns out, a lot of Tristan's investors weren't thrilled with his tendency to make business decisions based on his personal life. Funny how that works. So, when my 12.4% stake activated its voting block provisions, the ones buried in Section 47 of the partnership agreement that nobody reads because it's about as exciting as watching paint dry, it would automatically trigger a defensive position with the other minority shareholders. I'd been courting. Suddenly, Tristan's controlling interest wasn't quite so controlling anymore. The beautiful thing about the dashboard was that it updated in real time. So Celine could watch her world fall apart in high definition with timestamps and confirmation numbers and all the professional courtesy of a bank statement. No drama, no emotional manipulation, no screaming or crying or throwing things. Just the cold hard facts of what happens when you mistake someone's support for weakness. By now, Louis' sweep would be executing. Amara's emergency filings would be hitting the court system. Nor's vendor messages would be propagating through fulfillment networks from here to Hong Kong. And somewhere in a private lounge overlooking the Hudson River, my wife was about to discover that the man she'd just traded in for a newer model had been the one keeping her engine running all along. I imagined Celine's face when she realized that those jewelry gifts Tristan had been sending her, the diamond tennis bracelet, the vintage Cartier watch, the ruby earrings that showed up just because had all been purchased using a Clawwords corporate accounts. Accounts that I guaranteed accounts that were about to be frozen pending a full audit of personal versus business expenses. The IRS was going to have some very interesting questions about those gifts. Questions that would require lawyers to answer expensive lawyers. I imagined Tristan's face when he realized that his romantic gesture, proposing in public, making it a social media moment, turning my humiliation into his victory lap, had just triggered the minority shareholder revolt he'd been worried about for 2 years. The board meeting on Monday was going to be fascinating. But most of all, I imagined the moment when both of them realized that the quiet guy they dismissed as irrelevant had been playing a completely different game than they thought. They were playing house. I was playing chess. And I'd been thinking 5 moves ahead since the day Selena first mentioned that Tristan was just helping with some business connections. The QR code would also give them access to one more thing, my new contact information, because after tonight, the old phone number wasn't going to work anymore. The old email wasn't going to work anymore. The old Julian who smiled and nodded and paid for everything while pretending not to notice what was happening wasn't going to work anymore. If they wanted to talk to me, and they were definitely going to want to talk to me, they were going to have to go through Amara. And Amara, as I mentioned, doesn't do small talk. I finished my Earl Grey and looked at the clock. 11:43 p.m. 17 minutes until the midnight sweep. 17 minutes until Selene's credit card started getting declined. 17 minutes until the most expensive birthday party in Manhattan history became the most expensive mistake in Selena Ward's carefully curated life. Time to see if love really could conquer all, especially when all included a 6F-figure bill and a minority shareholder revolt. You know that moment in horror movies when everything goes quiet right before all hell breaks loose? Yeah, that lasted about 12 minutes. At exactly 12:03 a.m., My phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree that was also somehow on fire. The first call came from Selena. Obviously, I let it go to voicemail because honestly, what was she going to say? Hey honey, just wanted to chat about how I got engaged to someone else at my birthday party, and also my credit cards aren't working, and also what's this thing about minority shareholder blocks, and also are you completely insane? The second call came 30 seconds later. Also, Selena also sent to voicemail. The third call, Selena again, but this time she was clearly panic dialing because the ring lasted about 2 seconds before she hung up and immediately called back. By 12:15, I had 27 missed calls. By 12:30, it was 63. By 1:00 a.m. my phone had basically given up trying to keep count and just started vibrating continuously like it was having some kind of electronic seizure. I turned the phone face down on my kitchen counter and went to make another cup of tea. Earl Grey again. Because apparently I was having a very expensive night in more ways than one. The beautiful thing about letting people panic call you is that it gives you a real-time reading of their mental state. The progression from confused to concerned to completely losing there is fascinating to watch even when you can't actually hear the conversations. Call pattern analysis. NUA had taught me. You can learn a lot about a crisis by tracking who calls when and how often. Selena every 30 seconds for the first hour. Classic denial phase. She was still thinking this was some kind of misunderstanding that could be cleared up with the right conversation. Mary Soul, Selena's sister, every 5 minutes starting at 12:45. Someone had filled her in on the situation and she was trying to play mediator. Good luck with that, Marissa. Tristan's assistant, Rhea, calling every 2 minutes starting at 1:15, which meant Tristan had figured out the Hale Meridian angle and was now in full damage control mode, probably trying to schedule an emergency board meeting to explain why his personal life was suddenly threatening his professional one. Quinn LaMere, Selene's PR fixer. 3 calls then nothing. Quinn was smart enough to know when a situation was beyond spin control. When your client gets engaged to someone else's husband and then her entire business collapses in the same night, that's not a messaging problem. That's a maybe we should all lawyer up problem. The venue manager. 7 calls between 1:30 and 2 a.m. Someone was discovering that their 6F-figure deposit had been clawed back and they had a very expensive party to clean up with no way to get paid for it. The florist, 2 calls. Apparently, someone had tried to cancel the flower arrangements after they had already been delivered. Awkward. The string quartet leader. 1 call at 2:15 a.m. I actually felt a little bad about this one. Musicians don't get paid enough to deal with rich people's personal drama. Even the valet captain called the valet captain, which meant the night had gotten so messy that even the parking guys were confused about who was supposed to pay for what. But the really interesting calls were the ones that started coming in around 2:30 a.m. numbers I didn't recognize. Area codes from all over the country. A few international numbers that my phone marked as possible spam, but that I knew weren't spam at all. Those were the minority shareholders. Because apparently when you activate a defensive voting block at a major venture capital firm, word travels fast. And when word travels fast in finance circles, people start making phone calls to figure out what the hell is happening and whether they need to protect their own interests. I could practically hear the conversations happening in home offices and hotel rooms from here to Hong Kong. Did you see the filing? What filing? The emergency governance review at Hale Meridian. Who called for it? Some guy named Reyes. Minority shareholder. Apparently Tristan just made a very public decision that could constitute reputational risk. What kind of decision? The kind where you propose to someone else's wife at a party that's being live-streamed on Instagram. Jesus Christ. Yeah. And get this, the husband owns 12% of the firm. Cue panic calling. The thing about finance people is that they don't care about your personal life until it affects their money. But the second your personal life threatens their returns, they become very interested in your personal life very quickly. And Tristan's little romantic gesture had just made his personal life everyone's business. By 3 a.m., I had 184 missed calls. By 4 a.m. it was 227 and my phone had started sending me battery warnings because it had been vibrating nonstop for 4 hours. I finally turned the damn thing off and went to bed. Well, I tried to go to bed. Hard to sleep when you can hear your downs. Apparently, some enterprising reporter had figured out where I lived and was calling everyone in the building trying to get someone to buzz them up. Good luck with that, too. My building's got the kind of security that requires 2 forms of ID and a blood sample just to get past the front desk. At 5:30 a.m., my door intercom bust. Hugo, the night concierge, sounding like he'd been dealing with this kind of thing for years. Mr. Reyes, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a gentleman from Hale Meridian Capital downstairs says it's urgent. I looked at the intercom camera screen. Young guy in an expensive suit that looked like it had been slept in. carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of stressed expression that you get when your boss sends you to clean up a mess at 5:30 in the morning. "What's his name?" I asked. "Marcus Webb says he's from their legal department." Of course he was. Tristan was sending lawyers now. Probably figured that if he couldn't reach me directly, maybe he could intimidate me through official channels. "Tell Mr. Webb that if he wants to schedule a meeting, he can contact my attorney, Amara Okafor at Steinberg & Associates. Her office opens at 9 o'clock, and if he says it can't wait until 9 o'clock, tell him that everything waits until 9. And Hugo, yes, sir. Offer him some water. He looks like he needs it." "Very good, sir." I turned off the intercom and looked out my bedroom window. The sun was starting to come up over the East River, painting the sky that weird orange color that makes Manhattan look like it's on fire. Down on the street, I could see news vans starting to gather. Not the big network trucks, but those smaller operations that chase local stories and social media drama. Someone had figured out that last night's engagement party was connected to a bigger story, and now they wanted to be here when the other shoe dropped. They were going to be waiting a while. See, the thing about creating a financial avalanche is that it takes time for all the rocks to finish falling. What happened at midnight was just the first tremor. The real earthquake was going to hit when the markets opened and people started trying to figure out what the hell had happened to Aclaw Ward's credit facilities and why Hale Meridian Capital was suddenly calling emergency board meetings. I made coffee, the good stuff, because why not, and sat down at my kitchen table to wait for my phone to start working again. 227 missed calls in one night. That had to be some kind of record. Too bad I wasn't planning to return any of them. You know what's funny about desperate people? They always think the rules don't apply to them when they're in crisis mode. Like somehow their emergency becomes everyone else's emergency and basic courtesy goes out the window because they're having a bad night. The knock came at exactly 12:08 a.m. I know because I was watching the clock, waiting for Louis' sweep to execute at midnight. 3 sharp raps on my door, the kind that says official business, but with an undertone of please don't make this harder than it has to be. I looked through the peephole and had to suppress a laugh. Rhea Morani and Quinn LaMere standing in my hallway like the world's most expensive door-to-door sales team. Both of them looked like they'd been dragged through a hedge backwards, which was particularly impressive considering they'd been dressed for a high-end party about 2 hours ago. Rhea was Tristan's assistant, the kind of person who could schedule a hostile takeover between lunch meetings and make it look effortless. Normally, she had that unflappable executive assistant energy that could handle anything from booking private jets to managing PR disasters. Tonight, she looked like someone who'd just discovered that her boss's romantic gesture had accidentally triggered a financial nuclear bomb. Quinn was Selena's PR fixer, a woman who'd built a career on making problems disappear before they became problems. She specialized in reputation management for lifestyle brands, which was a fancy way of saying she cleaned up messes for people who couldn't afford to have messes. Usually, she looked like she could spin a natural disaster into a brand partnership opportunity. Tonight, she looked like she was personally having the natural disaster. Both of them were pale in that specific way that happens when someone realizes they're dealing with a situation that's way above their pay grade. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, not inviting them in. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is make people say their piece while standing in a hallway. Julian Quinn started her hands up in that universal gesture of I come in peace. This is all just a misunderstanding. I looked at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable. Quinn was used to controlling conversations, steering narratives, managing the flow of information. Making her stand in my hallway at midnight while she tried to figure out what to say was probably the most off-balance she'd been in years. Nothing is misunderstood. I finally said, keeping my voice calm and level. Everything is documented. That hit them both like a slap. You could see the realization dawning that this wasn't some emotional outburst they could talk me down from. This was business. Cold, calculated, and completely legal business. Rhea stepped forward, pulling a manila folder from her bag with the kind of careful precision that meant she'd been practicing this moment in her head for the last hour. Julian, I know tonight was difficult, she said, using that careful diplomatic language that people use when they're trying not to admit how badly someone screwed up. But Mr. Hale wanted me to bring you these proposals, bridge agreements, temporary accommodations, ways we can work together to make sure everyone comes out of this hole. She held the folder toward me like it was some kind of peace offering. I could see the edge of a letterhead that probably started with in consideration of mutual benefit and ended with please don't destroy my client's life. I took the folder, flipped it open, and spent exactly 30 seconds scanning the contents. Standard damage control stuff. Hush agreements disguised as consulting contracts. Non-disclosure agreements wrapped in financial settlements. A don't embarrass her publicly clause that was probably Quinn's contribution. The kind of paperwork that rich people use to make problems go away quietly. I closed the folder and handed it back to Rhea. The best non-disclosure agreement in the world, I said, is silence I owe myself. Both of them stared at me like I'd just spoken in ancient Greek. But Julian Quinn tried again. We can make this work for everyone. Selena never meant for things to go this far. The engagement, the public announcement, it all happened so fast. People get caught up in the moment, you know. Yeah, I said. I know exactly how people get caught up in the moment. I watched it happen for about 10 minutes while I stood in the back of the room holding birthday flowers. Quinn winced. Rhea looked down at her expensive shoes. Look, Rhea said, trying the Tristan angle. Mr. Hale has significant resources. He can make everyone whole. Whatever tonight cost, whatever disruption this causes, he's prepared to cover all of it. He should start with himself. I replied. That's when I pulled out a copy of the venue contract addendum from my back pocket. The one I'd been carrying around since this afternoon when I'd had a feeling this conversation was going to happen eventually. I handed it to Quinn because she was the one who supposedly understood legal documents and their implications. Section 12C. I said helpfully. Primary sponsor withdrawal due to material misrepresentation. Quinn's face went from pale to white as she read. You could practically see her brain doing the math, calculating the total cost of tonight's party, and realizing that every penny of it was about to become Selena's personal responsibility. The venue rental, the catering, the string quartet, the flowers, the champagne, the photographer, the security, even the valet service. All of it reverting to Celine Ward's personal accounts because the woman who'd just gotten engaged to someone else had somehow forgotten to mention that little detail when she'd booked a party using her husband's credit facilities. This can't be legal, Quinn said. But her voice had that hollow quality that meant she knew it absolutely was legal. It's very legal, I confirmed. It's also very enforceable and very expensive. Rhea tried one more time, reaching for the folder again. Julian, Mr. Hale can write a check tonight. Whatever the number is, he can cover it. He just wants to avoid any unnecessary complications. Unnecessary complications, I repeated like minority shareholder revolts. The color that had just started returning to Rhea's face disappeared again. You know about the board meeting, she said. It wasn't a question. I know about a lot of things, I said. I know about emergency governance reviews. I know about reputational risk assessments. I know about what happens when the guy who's supposed to be making sound financial decisions for other people's money decides to propose to someone else's wife on Instagram Live. Both women looked like they wanted to be literally anywhere else in the world. What do you want? Quinn asked, finally cutting through all the diplomatic and getting to the point. It was a fair question and I had a fair answer. I want accuracy. I said I want Celine to sign the separation agreement that my lawyer is filing tomorrow morning. I want her to return every penny she spent from company lines for personal expenses. I want her to issue a public statement in her own words, not yours, acknowledging that I built what I built and she chose what she chose. And after that, I want all of us to go very, very quiet. And if she does all that, Rhea asked, then she gets to keep her business and her reputation and her new fiancé. And Tristan gets to keep his board seat and his controlling interest and his shiny public image. And if she doesn't, I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. Then we find out exactly how much damage one very quiet minority shareholder can do when he stops being quiet. I stepped back into my apartment and started to close the door. Wait, Quinn called out. How do we reach you? Your phone's going straight to voicemail. You don't reach me. I said, you reach my attorney, Amara Okaper at Steinberg & Associates. She'll be expecting your call. And I closed the door gently, leaving them standing in the hallway with their folder full of hush money and their slowly dawning realization that they were dealing with someone who'd been planning this conversation for a lot longer than they'd been dreading it. Through the peephole, I watched them stand there for another 30 seconds, probably trying to figure out what the hell they were going to tell their clients. Good luck with that. You know what they say about death by 1,000 cuts. Turns out financial death only takes about 7. At exactly 23:59, while Rhea and Quinn were probably still standing in my hallway trying to figure out how to explain to their clients that diplomacy had failed, Louise executed the sweep. I didn't need to watch it happen in real time. Louise was thorough enough to set up automated confirmations that would hit my email every time a transaction processed. But I'll admit, there was something deeply satisfying about sitting in my kitchen with a cup of Earl Grey, watching my phone light up with notifications as the financial infrastructure of Celine's carefully curated life systematically shut down. 12 o'clock and 1 second. Authorization revoked. Eclat Ward Corporate AMX *** 12 o'clock and 3 seconds. Authorization revoked. Selene Ward Personal AMX Business Guarantee ** 12 o'clock and 7 seconds. Authorization revoked. Merchant account number 4471 to 982 ** 12 o'clock and 12 seconds. Hold placed. Joint checking account #SS 4492 ** 12 o'clock and 18 seconds. Hold placed. Business line of credit #lock 8847 **. The beautiful thing about modern banking is that everything happens instantly. No waiting for business hours, no processing delays, no grace periods. 1 minute your credit cards work, the next minute they don't. And there's no middle ground where you can charm your way through a transaction. The first casualty was the gown stylist. Apparently, Selena had arranged for some designer dress situation for the after-party because obviously the outfit that was good enough for getting engaged wasn't fancy enough for celebrating the engagement. The stylist tried to run her card for the rental fee at 12:23 a.m. and got the kind of decline message that makes retail workers nervous. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Madison from Atelier Block. Is there another payment method for Ms. Ward's evening gown rental?" The card on file was declined. I deleted the text without responding. Not my problem anymore. The after-party lounge was next. See, when you get engaged at a birthday party in Manhattan, apparently the thing to do is immediately migrate to another venue where everyone can continue celebrating your life choices while running up another 5-figure bar tab. Selene and Tristan had booked a private room at some rooftop place in Soho, the kind of spot that charges $300 for a bottle of champagne that costs $30 at the store. At 12:47 a.m., the venue manager called me directly. "Mr. Reyes, this is David from Skyline Lounge. We're having an issue with the payment authorization for the Ward party. The card we have on file is being declined, and Ms. Ward suggested we contact you." The audacity was almost impressive. Selene had given them my number as backup payment even after getting engaged to someone else 2 hours earlier, like I was some kind of customer service department for her lifestyle choices. "I'm not responsible for Ms. Ward's expenses," I said politely. "You'll need to work that out directly with her." "But sir, we have a signed agreement that lists you as the guarantor for check the timestamp on that agreement." I interrupted. Any authorization I provided was revoked as of midnight tonight. There was a pause while David presumably looked at his paperwork and realized that his very expensive party was suddenly his very expensive problem. "What should I tell the guests?" he asked. "Tell them to talk to the happy couple about payment arrangements." I hung up and added David's number to my block list. Poor guy was just doing his job, but I wasn't running a charity for other people's celebration expenses. The catering company was the third to fall. These were the vendors who'd provided the elaborate spread at the birthday party. Caviar service, champagne tower, those ridiculous little appetizers that cost $40 per bite and taste like disappointment. They'd been scheduled to clean up and clear out by 1 a.m., but apparently someone had tried to add some last-minute charges to the bill. Maybe additional champagne for the impromptu engagement celebration. Maybe overtime fees for dealing with the extended party. Maybe just the standard rich people tax that high-end vendors add when they think they can get away with it. Doesn't matter what it was. The payment bounced harder than a rubber ball on concrete. The catering manager, a woman named Elena, who sounded like she'd been dealing with rich peoples for about 20 years too long, called Selena directly to sort out the payment issue. I know this because I could hear Selene's voice through Elena's phone when she called me at 1:15 a.m. "Mr. Reyes, this is Elena from Prestige Catering. I have Miss Ward here and she's saying there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the payment authorization." In the background, I could hear Selena frantically trying to explain something about technical difficulties and temporary holds and how this was all just a big mix-up that would be sorted out in the morning. "There's no misunderstanding," I told Elena. "Ms. Ward is responsible for her own expenses now. You'll need to work out payment arrangements directly with her, but the original contract was nullified as of midnight tonight. Check your email for the formal notification because of course Amara had already sent termination notices to every vendor who'd been operating under my guarantees." The woman was nothing if not thorough. Elena sighed the kind of sigh that comes from dealing with rich people drama when you're just trying to get paid for honest work. "Ma'am," I heard her say to Selena, "you're going to need to provide an alternative payment method or we're going to have to hold the equipment until this gets resolved." The line went quiet and then I heard Selene's voice closer to the phone now. Julian, please. This is insane. People are watching. There are photographers here. You're humiliating me." "I left your party without making a scene," I said calmly. "You humiliated our marriage. I'm just correcting the accounting." "What do you want?" she asked. And for the first time all night, her voice cracked a little. "Money, an apology. Time to think about this." "I want accuracy," I said. I want you to sign the separation papers my lawyer is filing in the morning. I want you to pay back every penny you've spent from company accounts for personal expenses. I want you to issue a public statement in your own words, not Quinn's, acknowledging what I built and what you chose. After that, we go quiet. The line was silent for a long moment. Then I heard the sentence I'd been expecting for months, maybe years. You were never enough, Julian. There it was. The truth that had been hiding behind all the smiles and social media posts and carefully curated couple photos. The truth that had been sitting in the room during every dinner party and business meeting and quiet evening at home. I wasn't enough. I had never been enough. I was convenient. I was useful. I was financially reliable, but I wasn't enough. You're right, I said. I was more than enough. I was convenient. And I hung up. By 2 a.m., the damage reports were rolling in like storm updates. Amara's emergency filings had hit the court system exactly on schedule. The temporary financial orders were in place, freezing the 3 joint accounts that Selena used for what she generously called brand expenses. Noor's vendor pause orders had propagated through the supply chain, halting shipments and suspending adbuys from Brooklyn to Bangladesh. But the real masterpiece, the paper cut that was going to leave the deepest scar, arrived in Tristan's email at 2:17 a.m. A formal notice from Santiago, Hale Meridian's compliance chair, confirming that the minority shareholders' defensive bloc had officially called for an emergency governance review of any transactional engagement that presents material reputational risk to the firm's fiduciary responsibilities. The subject line was beautifully dry. Rego Governance Review Protocol. Urgent action required. The meaning was anything but dry. Stand down or face a very public audit of every decision you've made that could be construed as putting your personal interests ahead of your investors' interests. Starting with tonight, I poured myself another cup of tea and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Selena was probably trying to explain to a room full of people why her credit cards weren't working. Somewhere else, Tristan was probably getting his first taste of what it felt like when the people who controlled his money started asking uncomfortable questions about his judgment. And somewhere in between, a bunch of vendors and service providers were learning that rich people's problems become everyone else's problems real fast when the money stops flowing. Paper cuts that bleed. Sometimes the smallest wounds take the longest to heal. You know what's funny about people who never listen? When they finally start listening, they have no idea how to process what they're hearing. By morning, my phone wasn't ringing anymore. It was vibrating like a trapped bee having an existential crisis. The missed call counter had given up somewhere around 300 and just started showing many like my phone had developed a sense of humor about the situation. I made coffee, real coffee from the espresso machine I'd bought myself for Christmas 2 years ago because Celine thought it was too much machine for our kitchen aesthetic. Funny how different things look when you're not worried about someone else's aesthetic preferences. The sun was coming up over the East River, painting the sky that pale gold color that makes Manhattan look almost peaceful if you ignore all the sirens and construction noise and general chaos of 8 million people trying to get somewhere important. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd refinished myself because paying someone else to sand would seem like a waste of money, and watched the city wake up. At 7:23 a.m., I answered one call. Selena. Julian, she said, and her voice had that hollow quality that comes from not sleeping and crying and probably drinking too much champagne while your entire life implodes in real time. Please, you humiliated me. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out at the river. A garbage barge was making its way north, probably headed to some landfill in the Bronx where all of Manhattan's mistakes eventually end up. I left your party without a scene, I said softly. You humiliated our vows. I'm only correcting the ledger. There was a long pause in the background. I could hear voices. Quinn probably and maybe Marisol, Selena's sister. The damage control team working overtime to figure out how to spin a situation that was fundamentally unspinnable. What do you want? Selena asked finally. Money, an apology? Time to think about this? It was the same question she'd asked last night, but now it carried real weight. Now she understood that this wasn't some emotional outburst that would blow over if she just waited long enough. This was business, permanent, documented, legally binding business. I want accuracy, I said using the same words I'd used 12 hours ago. But this time, I knew she was actually listening. I want you to sign the separation agreement that Amara is filing this morning. I want you to return every penny you've spent from company accounts for personal expenses. I want you to issue a public statement in your own words, not Quinn's, acknowledging that I built what I built and you chose what you chose. After that, we go quiet. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. Then I heard her breathing. That shaky kind of breathing that comes right before someone either starts crying or starts screaming. The separation agreement, she said. What does it say? It says what we both know is true. That our marriage ended months ago. We just forgot to file the paperwork. It divides assets according to who actually earned them and who actually paid for them. It protects your business interests as long as you can fund them yourself. It keeps everything civil and legal and boring and the personal expenses. I pulled out my phone and opened the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for the past 6 months. Yes, a spreadsheet. Because when someone is slowly bleeding your finances dry while planning to leave you, documentation becomes important. Jewelry purchases through a Claw Ward's corporate accounts. I said, reading from the list. Total $47,836. Personal travel charge to business expenses $22,412. Business dinners that were actually dates with Tristan $8,963. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. Should I continue? I asked. Because I've got 2 more pages. That's not, those were legitimate business. Selena. I used the voice I reserved for when someone was about to say something that would make the situation worse for everyone involved. Don't. Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. The public statement. What exactly do you want me to say? The truth. That Julian Reyes provided financial backing, operational support, and infrastructure development for a Claw Ward from inception through current operations. That the success of the company was built on a foundation of shared resources and joint effort. That I chose to prioritize the business over personal recognition. And you chose to prioritize personal opportunities over marital commitments. That makes me sound like someone who made choices, which you did. People will think I'm a gold digger. People who know you will think you're someone who built a business with help and then moved on when better opportunities presented themselves. People who don't know you will think whatever they want to think regardless of what you say. And after that, after I sign everything and pay everything back and humiliate myself publicly. After that, you get to keep your business, your reputation, and your new fiancé. You get to start fresh with someone who can afford your lifestyle without expecting credit for it. You get to be exactly who you want to be with exactly who you want to be with. And you get what? I looked around my kitchen at the cabinets I'd built and the appliances I'd chosen and the view I'd paid for it, the space that was mine because I'd worked for it, not because someone had given it to me or because I'd leveraged someone else's guarantees to afford it. I get accuracy, I said. I get credit for what I built. I get to stop funding a story that erases me. Julian. Her voice broke a little. We were happy once. We were convenient once. I corrected. There's a difference. The line went quiet again. When Selena spoke, it was in that flat tone. That means someone has finally accepted a reality they've been fighting. How long do I have? Amara will send you the paperwork this morning. You have 72 hours to review it with your own lawyer and respond. The financial reconciliation needs to be completed within 30 days. The public statement can happen whenever you're ready. But it needs to happen before the separation agreement is finalized. And if I don't, then we find out how much damage one very quiet minority shareholder can do when he stops being quiet. We find out how much a Claw Ward is worth when its credit facilities disappear overnight. We find out how much Tristan's board position is worth when his investors realize he's making business decisions based on his personal life. You'd really destroy everything we built together. Selena, there is no we anymore. There hasn't been for months. I'm just making it official. The silence that followed was different. Final. Like the moment when you realize that a conversation you've been having for years is finally over. I need to think about this. She said, no, you don't. You need to sign the papers and write the statement and move on with your life. Thinking is what got us into this situation in the first place. That's not fair. Fair would have been having this conversation 6 months ago when you started planning your exit strategy. There would have been not getting engaged to someone else at a party I paid for. There would have been a lot of things that didn't happen. I finished my coffee and looked at the clock. 8:15 a.m. The markets would be opening soon and Santiago would be calling his emergency board meeting, and somewhere in Midtown, Tristan would be discovering that his romantic gesture had accidentally triggered a corporate governance crisis. I have to go, I said. Amara will send you everything you need. Read it carefully. Sign it quickly. And Selena, yeah, next time you want to leave someone, just leave. The dramatic gesture thing doesn't suit you. I hung up and deleted her number from my contacts because accuracy, it turns out, includes knowing when a conversation is finally finished. And this one had been finished for a long time before either of us had the courage to admit it. Time to make some more coffee and wait for the morning news to catch up with what had happened overnight. This was going to be an interesting day. You know what's weird about winning? The moment after everything falls into place, when the dust settles and the chaos stops and you're just sitting there thinking, well, that happened. The day unfolded with the kind of steady rhythm that comes after you've set a bunch of dominoes in motion, and now you just get to watch them fall. At 9:15 a.m., my email pinged with a confirmation from the court clerk. Temporary financial orders approved. Joint accounts frozen pending separation proceedings. Asset preservation measures in effect. All very official, all very legal, all very permanent. Amara had attached a note. Clean work. They can't touch anything until this gets resolved. Expect pushback by noon. At 10:30 a.m., NUA sent me a status update that read like a military operation report. Vendor notifications delivered. Shipment reversals processing. Inventory recalls 73% complete. Credit facilities suspended pending new authorization from primary guarantor. That would be me. She'd included a thank you note from our logistics partner in Brooklyn. Appreciate the clarity on authorization changes. Refreshing to work with someone who communicates expectations clearly. Even the vendors were taking sides. At 11:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Emergency board meeting scheduled. Governance review initiated. Your attendance requested but not required. Sickball Santiago being diplomatic. The minority bloc had done its job. Tristan was about to spend his morning explaining to a room full of investors why his engagement party had triggered a shareholder revolt. But the text that made me actually smile came at 12:30 p.m. from a contact I hadn't heard from in months. Auntie Fion Nana. That's what I called my mother's best friend since I was 7 years old. Even though we weren't related. And she'd moved to Atlanta 10 years ago. She'd been watching the whole drama unfold through the magic of social media and family gossip networks. The message was perfect in its simplicity. A single red heart emoji followed by a pot of soup emoji. No questions, no advice, no are you okay check-ins, just love and the promise of pepper soup the next time I made it down to Georgia. Sometimes the best support comes from people who've known you long enough to understand that you don't need fixing, just witnessing. I packed 2 bags that afternoon, not because I was running away, but because staying in the loft felt like living in a museum of someone else's life. Every piece of furniture, every carefully curated decoration, every Instagram-worthy corner reminded me of conversations about our aesthetic and our brand and our vision for the space. Turns out most of it had been her vision. I'd just been the guy who figured out how to pay for it. I found a short-term rental in a building overlooking Washington Square Park. Clean walls, hardwood floors, a simple desk by the window, and most importantly, a lease that didn't require anyone else's signature. The kind of place where you could think clearly because nothing was trying to make a statement except the view. That evening, I made a list. Called it mine because I worked for them. Expected it to be long, detailed, full of expensive items and complicated assets. Instead, I wrote down 5 things. 1. The coffee roaster I bought myself for Christmas. 2. The books on financial systems and operational design. 3. My mother's ring, the one that never fit Selena's aesthetic. 4. The set of tools I used for the kitchen renovation. 5. The quiet satisfaction of knowing exactly what I built. 5 items. That was it. Everything else was just stuff. Accumulation. The material evidence of a life that had been designed by committee rather than lived by choice. It felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because it meant starting over. Light because it meant starting over. At 8:30 p.m., Hugo buzzed from downstairs. Different building now, different concierge. But the message was familiar. Someone to see me. This time it was Mary Sol, Selena's sister, holding the white lilies I'd left at the party. The flowers looked like they'd been through a war, wilted and bruised from being passed around between venue managers and catering staff and probably a few confused photographers. She's breaking, Mary Sol said without preamble, holding out the flowers like a peace offering. I took them, not because I wanted them back, but because Mary Sol had driven across town to return something that was already dead. I broke quietly. Months ago, I said. I'm only finishing. Mary Sol nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she'd been watching her sister's marriage fall apart from the inside and wondering when someone was finally going to acknowledge what everyone could see. Is there anything she can do? Mary Sol asked to fix this. She can sign the papers. I said she can tell the truth. She can take responsibility for her choices. And then we all get to find out what our lives look like when they're not built on pretending that convenient is the same thing as happy. Mary Sol left the flowers and walked away without saying goodbye. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone finish what they started. I put the lilies in a glass of water, not because I thought they'd recover, but because even dying things deserve dignity. Outside my window, Washington Square Park was full of people living their actual lives. Students studying under streetlights. Couples having real conversations on benches. Street musicians playing for tips instead of Instagram stories. Peace, it turns out, is quiet. Accountability is quieter. You know what's beautiful about the truth? It doesn't need a marketing strategy. 1 week later, Celine signed everything. The separation agreement, the repayment plan, and the statement that Quinn had probably rewritten 17 times trying to make it sound less like a confession and more like a mutual decision. It didn't work. The truth has a way of cutting through spin like a knife through tissue paper. Tristan paused his campaign because apparently running a venture capital firm had become a political race in his mind and retreated to focus on investors, which was corporate speak for spend the next 6 months convincing people that my personal life isn't a liability to their money. The board at Hale Meridian adopted Santiago's reputation risk protocol with actual teeth, new rules about public behavior, social media presence, and the radical concept that other people's marriages weren't appropriate venues for hostile takeovers. Ward downsized to what it actually was instead of what Selena had been pretending it could become. Turns out, when you remove artificial credit facilities and marketing budgets funded by someone else's guarantees, most lifestyle brands become hobby businesses pretty quickly. But here's the thing, it survived. Smaller, more honest, more sustainable. Sometimes the best thing you can do for something you built is stop propping it up and let it find its natural size. I kept my promises. No interviews, no tell-all articles, no victory laps on social media. I went back to my own company, my small team, my ordinary calendar that didn't require anyone else's approval to fill. I woke early, brewed coffee with the good machine, and watched Washington Square Park fill with runners who didn't know my name or my story or the details of my very public, very quiet divorce. Peace, it turns out, is invisible to people who aren't looking for it. People still ask what was in that gift box I left on the table. Reporters mostly and a few business bloggers who think there's some deeper meaning to decode. I tell them the truth, a key and a barcode, a future and a mirror. One opens what's yours, the other shows what you did, but the real gift wasn't what was in the box. The real gift was the door I didn't slam the scene. I didn't make the explanation I didn't know. The real gift was walking away with my dignity intact and my finances documented. True story. And the door they knocked on at midnight. I opened it, listened to what they had to say, and chose not to explain anything that the paperwork already said. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let your work speak for itself. Even when your work is letting go.